By the end of 1943, the war in the Pacific had reached a critical turning point. The Battle of Tarawa had been one of the most ferocious amphibious assaults in history, testing the resolve of the United States Marines against the deeply entrenched Japanese defenses. The island of Betio, once a heavily fortified Japanese stronghold, had become a pivotal American base, transformed into an even greater offensive power than the defenders had ever envisioned. With airstrips, supply depots, and artillery positions reinforcing its strategic value, Betio was no longer a battleground. It was a launchpad for the unstoppable U.S. advance across the Pacific. This is the story of how a once impenetrable fortress became a cornerstone of American military dominance, proving that even the most formidable defenses could be shattered and repurposed for a greater offensive. The battle for Betio was unlike anything the U.S. Marines had faced before. The island, no larger than a few square miles, had been transformed into a fortress by the Japanese, who believed their intricate defensive network would hold indefinitely. The coral reefs surrounding the island acted as a natural barrier, making amphibious landings incredibly difficult. The enemy had spent years preparing for an assault, positioning bunkers, trenches, machine gun nests, and artillery batteries in a way that maximized their fields of fire. They had dug in deep, determined to resist any invasion to the last man. When the U.S. forces arrived on November 20th, 1943, they were met with devastating gunfire before even reaching the beaches. As the Higgins boats carrying the Marines approached, they found themselves trapped by the low tide, forcing many to wade through chest-deep water under relentless fire. The open ocean provided no cover, and Japanese gunners, positioned in fortified pillboxes, took full advantage. Marines fell before they even reached the shore, the water turning red as bodies floated in the surf. The few who made it onto the beach found themselves pinned down, struggling to advance against an enemy that had spent years perfecting their defensive positions. There was no time to regroup. The only option was to push forward or die in the sand. The Japanese had underestimated one thing: the sheer determination of the U.S. Marines. Despite the brutal conditions, the relentless enemy fire, and the staggering casualties, they refused to retreat. As night fell, they dug shallow foxholes in the sand, using wreckage for cover as they braced for counterattacks. The defenders launched desperate banzai charges, hoping to drive the Americans back into the sea. But each wave of attackers was met with fierce resistance. Flamethrowers and grenades became essential tools, flushing out soldiers hiding in tunnels and bunkers. Inch by inch, the Marines advanced, using every weapon at their disposal to break through the enemy's final lines of defense. By the second day, reinforcements had arrived, and more troops poured onto the island. With additional firepower, tanks, and artillery, the battle turned in favor of the Americans. Aircraft from nearby carriers strafed enemy positions, bombarding strongholds that had remained intact despite the initial assault. The once-thought impregnable bunkers collapsed under relentless pressure. The resistance was still fierce, but the momentum had shifted. Marines fought through the trenches, clearing them in brutal close-quarters combat. Japanese snipers, hidden in debris and trees, picked off soldiers whenever they could, but their numbers were dwindling. The defenders were running out of food, ammunition, and hope. By the third day, the Japanese forces were effectively wiped out. A handful of defenders, refusing to surrender, continued fighting, launching suicidal attacks rather than allowing themselves to be captured. Their code demanded death before dishonor, and they fought to the last man. When the guns finally fell silent on November 23rd, the island belonged to the United States. It had taken 3 days of relentless combat, nearly 1,100 Marine lives, and thousands more wounded to claim victory. The cost had been staggering, but the result was undeniable. Betio had been secured, and the United States had proven that even the most well-defended enemy strongholds could be taken. The battle had a profound impact on both sides. For the Americans, it was a harsh lesson in the realities of amphibious warfare. The high casualties and brutal conditions forced military planners to reevaluate their strategies for future island assaults. They recognized the need for improved coordination between naval bombardment, aerial strikes, and landing forces. The bloodshed at Tarawa would not be in vain, It would shape the tactics used in the coming campaigns against Japanese-held islands. For Japan, the loss of Betio was a crushing blow. The island had been considered an impenetrable outpost, a vital part of their defensive perimeter in the Pacific. Its fall shattered the illusion that their empire was secure. They had underestimated the resilience of the Marines, and now they faced the reality that the American offensive was not just an isolated push. It was the beginning of an unstoppable wave. The defeat at Betio marked a turning point, one that signaled the gradual collapse of Japanese control in the Pacific. The dead were buried in makeshift graves on the island, their sacrifice etched into history. Survivors carried the memories of the battle with them, forever changed by what they had endured. The lessons learned at Betio would prepare them for the battles still to come. This was not the end, but rather the beginning of a relentless march across the Pacific, where every island taken brought them one step closer to victory. With Betio secured, the immediate focus shifted from battle to rebuilding. The island, once a heavily fortified Japanese stronghold, was now in American hands, but its transformation was far from complete. The aftermath of the brutal three-day battle left the landscape scarred, covered in debris, wreckage, and the remains of the fierce fight. The trenches, bunkers, and pillboxes that had once served as defensive positions were now being repurposed into something far more valuable to the U.S. military, a launching pad for further offensives across the Pacific. The Seabees, the Navy's construction battalions, wasted no time. Their mission was clear: turn this shattered island into a fully operational military base. The first priority was the airstrip. Although the Japanese had originally constructed it for their own purposes, the battle had left it in ruins. Bomb craters littered the field, and debris from destroyed aircraft, weapons, and vehicles made it unusable. Engineers and labor crews worked tirelessly, clearing the wreckage and repairing the runways. They operated under harsh conditions, extreme heat, humidity, and the ever-present stench of death. Yet the urgency of the task drove them forward. Every hour spent working meant another step toward strengthening America's position in the Pacific. Within days, the first American aircraft touched down on Betio. Fighters and bombers that had previously launched from distant carriers could now use the island as a permanent base, greatly expanding the reach of U.S. air power. The advantage was immediate. From Betio, bombing raids could target Japanese positions deeper in the Central Pacific, and reconnaissance missions could track enemy movements with greater efficiency. What had once been a strategic Japanese outpost was now an American forward operating base, ready to support the next phase of the war. As the airstrip became operational, supply ships arrived to reinforce the garrison. Equipment, weapons, and provisions flooded onto the island, replacing the devastation with renewed purpose. The skeletal remains of Japanese fortifications were repurposed into storage areas, command centers, and defensive positions against any potential counterattack. The very structures built to keep the Americans out were now being used to ensure they remained in control. Barbed wire, once positioned to stop an invasion, now surrounded the perimeter to protect against infiltrators. Gun emplacements were turned outward, prepared for any desperate enemy attempt to retake the island. The strategic importance of Betio could not be overstated. It became the cornerstone of a broader campaign, allowing for quicker resupply and deployment of troops to future battle zones. The island's proximity to Japanese-held territories meant that bombing runs could be launched with greater frequency, keeping the pressure on an enemy that was already beginning to falter. It was no longer a defensive stronghold, but an offensive powerhouse. Every aircraft that took off from Betio carried with it the momentum of the American advance, striking at the heart of Japan's empire. Life on the island was far from easy. The heat was oppressive, the humidity unbearable, and the constant buzzing of insects made every moment a test of endurance. The men stationed there knew they were living on the front lines of a war that was still far from over. There was no luxury, no respite from the harsh conditions. But they also knew their presence was necessary. Every piece of infrastructure they built, every bunker they reinforced, and every flight they launched brought them one step closer to the ultimate goal: defeating Japan and bringing the war to an end. The enemy understood the significance of losing Betio. Japanese commanders, now on the defensive, recognized that every base they lost tightened the noose around their forces. Attempts were made to disrupt American operations, but they were met with swift retaliation. Any incoming enemy aircraft were intercepted before they could do serious damage. The U.S. Navy patrolled the waters relentlessly, ensuring that no reinforcement or resupply effort could reach Japanese-held islands nearby. The tables had turned. Where once Japan had built Betio into an impenetrable fortress, it was now America's forward spearhead, driving deeper into enemy territory. As days turned into weeks, the transformation was undeniable. The island had gone from a place of destruction to a symbol of American resilience and ingenuity. It stood as proof that no position, no matter how well fortified, was beyond capture and conversion. The same forces that had stormed its beaches were now using it to launch missions that would shape the course of the war. What had once been a desperate fight for survival had become a platform for expansion. Every victory carried a lesson, and Betio's transformation was a testament to the ability to adapt, rebuild, and push forward. The battle for the island had been won, but its true value was only just beginning to be realized. From here, the war would continue, and Betio would serve as a reminder that even the strongest defenses could be turned into the most powerful offenses. The transformation of Betio into a powerful American base had altered the strategic landscape of the Pacific. No longer just a captured island, it had become an essential hub for launching operations, providing a forward position from which the United States could push deeper into Japanese-held territory. The airfield, once in ruins, was now fully operational, allowing bombers and fighters to conduct missions that extended the reach of American firepower. Supply ships arrived in steady waves, ensuring that the troops stationed there had everything needed to sustain the growing offensive. Betio was no longer just an island. It was a symbol of momentum, proof that Japan's defensive perimeter was crumbling. The Japanese had spent years fortifying the island, believing it would be impossible to take. Yet in just a few short months, it had been turned into something far more formidable than they had ever envisioned. American engineers and Seabees continued to expand its infrastructure, reinforcing airstrips, constructing barracks, and improving logistics operations. Fuel depots and ammunition stockpiles allowed for rapid rearming of aircraft, ensuring that every mission launched from the island had the full support needed to strike deep into enemy lines. The transition from a defensive outpost to an offensive powerhouse was complete. With its airfield serving as a launching pad, Betio played a direct role in the campaign against Japanese forces in the Marshall Islands. Long-range bombers, now stationed closer than ever, relentlessly pounded enemy positions, softening defenses and disrupting supply chains. Fighter squadrons provided air cover for advancing naval fleets, ensuring that Japan could not regain the upper hand in the skies. The ability to project force from Betio gave the United States a decisive advantage, accelerating the pace of the island-hopping strategy that was steadily pushing toward the Japanese homeland. American forces continued to refine their coordination between air, land, and sea operations, with Betio acting as the connective point between multiple ongoing offensives. The island was small, but its significance was vast. It was no longer a single battle zone, but an integral part of a larger war effort, where intelligence, logistics, and firepower combined to maintain pressure on the enemy. Every successful raid and bombing mission that launched from its runways weakened Japan's grip on the Pacific, bringing the conflict closer to its inevitable conclusion. The morale among the troops stationed on Betio reflected the shift in momentum. Where there had once been uncertainty about how long the war would last, there was now a growing confidence that the end was within reach. The victories that followed the establishment of the base reinforced the belief that Japan's defenses could not hold indefinitely. The empire that had once seemed unshakable was now on the defensive, struggling to maintain its positions as American forces advanced with relentless precision. Each island that fell to U.S. control made it harder for Japan to sustain its war machine, and Betio had become a key part of that dismantling process. Despite the island's role in the broader campaign, life for those stationed there was still harsh. The tropical climate remained unforgiving, with blistering heat, humidity, and the constant threat of disease. Supply lines were steady, but living conditions were far from comfortable. The men who worked tirelessly, to keep the base operational understood that their efforts were part of something much larger than themselves. Their role was not just to hold the island but to ensure that it remained an unshakable foothold in the Pacific. They knew that every aircraft that took off, every ship that docked, and every order that was carried out from Betio was contributing to the greater objective of ending the war. For the Japanese High Command, the loss of Betio was more than just another island falling to the Americans. It was a clear sign that their strategy of heavily fortified positions could not stop the tide of war from turning against them. The belief that their strongholds were impenetrable had been shattered. With Betio lost, they knew that every other island in their defensive perimeter was now vulnerable. The war had shifted from one of expansion to one of desperation, as they scrambled to reinforce positions that could no longer withstand the relentless American offensive. As Betio continued to serve as a major staging ground, the war in the Pacific moved into its next phase. The battles that followed were just as intense, but the lessons learned from Betio's capture and transformation guided every new assault. The ability to take an enemy's strongest position and turn it into an even greater weapon against them had become a defining feature of the American strategy. The war was far from over, but the path forward was clear. The forces stationed at Betio knew that their role in the fight had shifted from securing victory on one island to ensuring the success of an entire campaign. The island had been taken through sacrifice, rebuilt through determination, and now stood as a fortress from which the war could be won. What had once been a seemingly impenetrable obstacle was now a launching point for the final push toward victory. Japan had built Betio to stop an invasion. Instead, it had become the very tool that was dismantling their empire, one battle at a time. The strategic importance of Betio continued to grow as the Pacific War progressed. With every successful mission launched from its airfields and every supply ship that docked along its shores, the island's role in the campaign became even more vital. The transformation of what was once a heavily fortified enemy stronghold into a fully functional American base was not just a tactical victory. It was a demonstration of the overwhelming force and adaptability that defined the Allied war effort. The lessons learned in the battles leading to its capture had reshaped military planning, ensuring that future amphibious operations would be executed with even greater precision. As the months passed, the momentum that had been building since the fall of Betio continued to accelerate. The island now served as a key link in the chain of offensives that carried American forces deeper into Japanese-held territory. The infrastructure that had been rapidly developed allowed for a steady flow of reinforcements, fuel, and ammunition, ensuring that every unit moving through the region was well equipped for the battles ahead. The airstrips remained active around the clock, sending bombers on long-range raids to weaken enemy positions and destroy supply lines before the next wave of ground troops advanced. From this forward base, the war was being waged with relentless intensity. Japan, recognizing the growing threat posed by the American presence on Betio, attempted to retaliate. Air raids were launched in desperate efforts to cripple the base, but American anti-aircraft defenses had been strengthened to withstand such attacks. Fighters scrambled at the first sign of enemy aircraft, engaging them before they could reach their targets. The few that managed to break through were met with a barrage of fire from the ground, ensuring that damage was minimal. The defenders of the island were battle-hardened, knowing that their role was crucial to maintaining the steady advance across the Pacific. Each successful defense of the island reinforced its value, proving that it had become an unbreakable stronghold. The continued success of Betio as a base of operations not only ensured that the United States maintained pressure on the enemy, but also demonstrated the effectiveness of the island-hopping strategy. Instead of engaging in prolonged battles for every piece of enemy-held territory, strategic locations like Betio provided the footholds needed to bypass heavily defended positions and cut off Japanese forces from their supply networks. This method of warfare ensured that the advancing forces maintained their strength, while the enemy was left to wither under isolation and relentless air and naval bombardment. The war was no longer just about winning individual battles. It was about dismantling the entire framework of Japan's defensive system. Life on the island remained difficult, despite the improvements in infrastructure. The heat was unrelenting, the humidity oppressive, and the constant threat of disease a challenge that every soldier and worker had to endure. But the significance of what was being accomplished overshadowed the hardships. The men stationed there understood that their work was contributing to something far greater than just holding an island. Every supply run, every plane that took off, and every reinforcement that arrived carried the weight of the larger mission, one that was pushing the war ever closer to its final stages. The capture and conversion of Betio had set a precedent that was followed throughout the remainder of the Pacific campaign. The tactics refined there were applied to future landings, making each successive invasion more efficient and less costly in human lives. The blood that had been spilled on its beaches had not been in vain. It had provided the knowledge needed to ensure that future battles were fought with greater effectiveness. The war was still brutal, still demanding the ultimate sacrifice from those who fought, but the pathway to victory was now clearer than ever. As the battles moved beyond Betio and deeper into the heart of Japanese territory, the island's role shifted slightly. No longer the primary staging ground, it remained an essential link in the supply chain, supporting the ongoing war effort. It became a place where battered units could regroup, where new troops could be prepared for the challenges ahead, and where the infrastructure of war continued to expand in anticipation of the final push toward the enemy's homeland. Its significance had not diminished. It had simply evolved to meet the changing needs of a military campaign that was rapidly approaching its conclusion. For those who had fought for Betio, and those who had worked tirelessly to build it into an unshakable base, its legacy was undeniable. It had been taken at great cost, transformed through sheer determination, and used to shape the outcome of the Pacific War. The island stood as proof that no enemy stronghold was truly impregnable, that any defensive position could be turned into an offensive asset. It was a testament to the resilience of those who had fought there, a symbol of the relentless drive that had carried American forces from one victory to the next. The war was moving toward its final chapters, but the impact of Betio would remain. It had been one of the first stepping stones in a campaign that would ultimately bring about Japan's surrender. The experience gained there had influenced every major battle that followed, from the Marshall Islands to Iwo Jima and beyond. The island had once been a fortress built to stop an invasion. Instead, it had become one of the most powerful tools in ensuring that the invasion continued, that the enemy had no place left to retreat. The soldiers, sailors, and airmen who had fought, built, and maintained Betio's role in the war carried its story with them. Some moved on to fight in other battles, others remained to ensure that it continued to serve its purpose. But all of them understood what had been accomplished there. The island had gone from an impenetrable bastion to a launching point for liberation, from a symbol of Japanese strength to undeniable proof of their inevitable defeat. The fight had been hard, the cost high, but the result was undeniable. The transformation of Betio had not just changed the course of a single battle. It had helped change the course of the war itself. The transformation of Betio had played a pivotal role in the Pacific campaign, marking a turning point in the war against Japan. What had once been a formidable enemy fortress was now an unshakable base, fueling the momentum of the American advance. Every aircraft that soared from its runways, every supply ship that docked on its shores, and every soldier who passed through its barracks contributed to the relentless push forward. The lessons learned from its capture and conversion had reshaped military operations, refining the tactics that would be used in future battles. Betio was no longer just an island. It was a symbol of what could be achieved through determination, strategy, and sacrifice. As the war continued its march toward the enemy's homeland, the significance of Betio did not fade. It remained a vital link in the chain of operations, ensuring that troops had the resources needed for each new objective. The steady movement of reinforcements, fuel, and ammunition kept the offensive strong, preventing any loss of momentum. The airstrip, once a target of destruction, had become a beacon of American power in the Pacific. Bombing runs launched from its runways struck deep into Japanese-held territory, dismantling the remnants of resistance before the next invasion even began. The impact of this base extended far beyond its physical boundaries, reaching across the ocean as each successful mission brought the war closer to its conclusion. For the men who had fought on Betio, its transformation was more than just a military achievement. It was proof that no stronghold was impenetrable, that even the most fortified positions could be overcome. They had seen their comrades fall in battle, had endured the brutal fight for every inch of ground, and had pushed forward when retreat was never an option. Now they watched as the island they had bled for became a cornerstone of the final victory. The sacrifices made there had not been in vain. They had forged a path that would lead to the war's end. The relentless American advance continued across the Pacific, each battle carrying the lessons of Betio with it. The tactics refined in its capture and defense became the blueprint for future assaults, ensuring that every island taken was done so with greater efficiency. The once feared defenses of the Japanese Empire were crumbling, unable to withstand the combined force of air, land, and sea power that had been perfected through these hard-fought battles. The war that had seemed so uncertain in its early years was now moving inevitably toward a final resolution. As the conflict neared its final stages, Betio's role shifted once again. No longer the primary staging ground for major offensives, it became a place of transition, a link in the vast network of bases supporting the final drive toward victory. Soldiers who had once stormed its beaches now moved on to new battlefields, carrying with them the experience gained in its conquest. The airfields that had once launched bombers toward distant enemy positions now saw transport planes carrying men and supplies to the next phase of the campaign. The island, once thought to be an unbreakable fortress, had been reshaped into something far greater, an instrument of war's end. With Japan's defeat growing ever closer, those who had served on Betio reflected on what had been accomplished. They had seen firsthand the horrors of war, had witnessed the brutal cost of each victory, and had played a part in reshaping history. The island, once the site of one of the bloodiest battles in the Pacific, had proven that no enemy position was truly invincible. It had become a testament to the perseverance and strength of those who fought there, a reminder of the resilience that had carried them through the darkest days of the war. As the final battles were fought and victory became a reality, Betio remained standing, a silent witness to the events that had unfolded on its shores. The structures built during its occupation continued to serve, though their purpose had changed. Where once it had been a launching point for destruction, it now stood as a monument to those who had sacrificed everything for a future beyond war. The guns fell silent, the bombers no longer took off in waves, and the island that had once been a crucial battleground faded into history. The war ended, but Betio's legacy endured. It remained a place of memory, a reminder of the cost of victory and the determination required to achieve it. Those who had fought there carried its story with them, passing it on to future generations so that the lessons learned in its conquest and transformation would never be forgotten. The island, once designed to stop an invasion, had instead played a role in ensuring that the forces of freedom triumphed. The battle had been won, the war had been decided, and the world had been changed forever.